But when, something like this happens, it pushes us on that and makes us rethink, what does it actually mean that God is in control? Because God surely doesn't want sickness, right? God surely doesn't want death. Well, that's true. And yet there are also greater purposes God has. I love Pastor Greg this past weekend talked about like the fact that we pray to our God who always desires our good. But our good may not be the good that we think. And so that's really, I think been humbling to walk through this.
Hello, my name is Zach Bowden, the host of the Leading Well podcast. And hey, with all this stuff going around with the virus, we thought we'd take a break from some other conversations we've had. And for the next few weeks, we're going to focus in some conversations to help you kind of with things that are happening in our world right now. And so today, John and I had a Zoom conversation talking about how to lead in times of uncertainty, because there's a lot of that right now. That's where in life of your small group or the team you're a part of, in life of our church, maybe it's in your work environment, maybe it's just in your home, or maybe just even just yourself. How do I lead when I don't even know what's happening today? And so in this conversation, John and I are going to walk through and talk through what he's learning about God, what he's learning about other people, and what he's learning about himself in the midst of leading us as a church through this uncertainty, him and Greg and our elders and our executive leadership team. And then we'll finish the conversation a little bit with some practical tips to kind of help you lead right now. And so we look forward to this conversation and other conversations we have coming in the next few weeks as we kind of walk through as a church and as an organization, as a family, how do we lead in the midst of this virus happening. So enjoy this conversation with Pastor John. So welcome, John, to our conversation on leading in the midst of we don't have all the answers. Uncertainty. There's a lot of that happening right now in our world and our culture. Every hour, or, maybe every day now, it feels like there's new news coming out. And so we're recording this on March 31st, 2020, middle of this virus, and new news is coming about this. And so John, you and Greg and our elders and our executive leadership team are leading us as a church through this virus. And conversation I would love to have with you today is helping us kind of, how do you lead in the midst of uncertainty? And there's a lot of uncertainty going on, and you don't have all the answers. How do you lead? And so I like to frame our conversation maybe in three ways. What have you learned about God in this? What are you learning about other people? And then what are you learning about yourself in the midst of leading and uncertainty? So tell me, what are you learning about God right now?
That's a great question. It's a great place to start. I'd say that, something like this just makes you realize how, what God's sovereignty looks like. We believe God is sovereign. We believe God is in control. But when, something like this happens, it pushes us on that and makes us rethink, what does it actually mean that God is in control? Because God surely doesn't want sickness, right? God surely doesn't want death. Well, that's true. And yet there are also greater purposes God has. I love Pastor Greg this past weekend talked about like the fact that we pray to our God who always desires our good. But our good may not be the good that we think. And so that's really, I think been humbling to walk through this, because it really pushes on the types of things that we value, and it really sets it up against the values that God ultimately has. And God, I truly believe God has some amazing purposes that are happening right now, even as we speak, and will come out of this circumstance, that just demonstrate his love and his care and his sovereignty in the midst of it. And so I think I've been learning more and more about what a powerful God is, how powerful God is, and what that power looks like, and what his goodness looks like.
That's good. That's a hard challenge for us. We all have our ideal, what we think good is. And I really appreciate how, you and Greg are leading us as a church to really respond and reframe what good really is, because good is real. How would you, I'll ask the question rather than saying something. how do you think God defines what good is, John?
I love that. So there's a John Piper quote, and he says something like this. He says, God hates all suffering, especially eternal suffering. Mm-hmm. And that reframes everything for me. Like, we have a God who hates sickness. Even more so, he hates spiritual sickness. We have a God who hates chaos, but he, more than that, hates spiritual chaos. And so it's humbling and convicting to me how much a crisis like this makes me realize how much my world is shaped by kind of a lens of this earth, of those things, and how much bigger God's view is of what health is, what true spiritual health is, and what true suffering is. That God is so grieved by these things. We get grieved by earthly suffering because we can see it. But if we had eyes to actually see spiritual suffering around us, it would look much worse than this pandemic every day of our lives.
I appreciate that perspective in the quote, and just to, appreciate that perspective there, John. What do you learn about other people in the midst of this crisis? What are you learning about others is a pretty broad term, and so you take that lots of different ways. Or your family, you talk about it in the midst of as a staff, you talk about it in the midst of a church, just people in general. What are you learning about others in this culture?
Yeah, I think a couple things. I'll start with on the positive side. Like, God's people are incredible. They are creative, and they are worshipful in the way that they steward their gifts when we are at our best, when we truly have our hearts set on Christ. And the church is amazing. It's amazing. At moments like this, you just recognize, absolutely, this is God's purpose of salvation, and God's means of salvation in this earth is through his people. God could work without us, but he chooses to, and it's a beautiful thing when God moves in us. And so I've just seen tremendous creativity, a tremendous agility, tremendous leadership within his church. And I say that both from a New Life perspective and also from a global perspective. I'm just so in awe of that. And yet at the same time, we're fragile people. I think this crisis really reminds us of just how fragile we are. One of the great myths of living in 21st century America is just thinking that we're in more control than we really are. That we have things, that we have things wrapped up, that, Christ, in one of the most fundamental prayers Christ calls us to pray is, give us this day our daily bread. Like, oh my goodness. Like, when was the last time that I really prayed that in a way that was meaningful, as so many others around the world do? And yet this strips us of our security on the systems of the world that we live in, and presses us back to the security of our Father. And so it's just made me realize just how fragile we are as well.
What about yourself, John? What have you learned about yourself in the midst of this crisis we're in as a culture, as a world?
Yeah, I think that everything I've said about others, I would include myself in there as well. I would say that there's a humbling aspect of realizing how dependent I am on rhythms in my life. And so when I'm thrown out of those, I'm still in process of trying to reconstruct good and healthy rhythms of exercise, rhythms of spiritual rhythms in my life. And so I need, I've recognized I need those, and I need to lean into those even more so. And I would say as a leader, I've recognized, a crisis like this just exposes your weaknesses. And so I am not smart enough. I am not wise enough to project what's going to happen, to make economic projections, to make any sort of projections that a leader is required to sort of lead through in the midst of this. And so there's Craig Rochelle recently on his podcast. He told leaders that in the midst of crisis, you can't manage your way through crisis. You have to lead through crisis. And man, is that true. And the way that I would kind of shake that out in my own heart would be to say, in a crisis, it is our vision and it is our connection to people that matters more than our systems. And we have to be crystal clear about what our vision and purpose is more than ever in the midst of a crisis. And we have to have those real connections, because once a crisis comes, it's really hard to develop those after the fact. And so to lean in on that trust is so significant. And so I think that there's a reality of that there's a testing of that in a good way, and also in a revealing way, that you cannot overcompensate. I can't try to pretend as though I know more than I do. I can't try to lead with having everything kind of nailed down or systems in place for months from now. I have to lead with what's given to me today, and I'm called to faithfulness in the midst of that, and I'm called to humility in the midst of that. So that would be kind of a handful of things that I'm learning through this.
I appreciate even just being able to walk along this journey with you, John. I definitely see you trying to lead us in this, but also leading us with a vision, and leading us with humility, and leading us with an openness as well. And so you just say those things. I just would just encourage you and affirm you that I see you and Greg especially together as our co-senior pastors, leading us with that heart. And so you would just say thank you, and what you're learning about yourself, you're practicing really well. So thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, when we broaden this conversation out a little bit, not just to John Beeson, but if you're talking to people who are leading their businesses or leading at home or leading in ministries or groups or teams, like what words of encouragement or even just kind of application would you encourage them to kind of be thinking through how to lead in the midst of this crisis?
Yeah, maybe to sort of boil down kind of what I've just said about what I've learned about myself and kind of apply that outward, I would say I would encourage leaders to more than ever speak the why, speak your vision. What's your heart in the midst of this? So even this week we had to, and it started with us, but we made some trimming of some staff to try to position ourselves to kind of weather the financial storm in the midst of this. And I think more than anything, at the heart of a conversation like that you have to speak value and love. There has to be a connection there and trust there. And there has to be the why. You have to speak the why to them. And so I think leading with the why and the vision is so important. I think leading with humility and just being really honest. We're leading in uncertain times. No one knows. There's no playbook for what it looks like to lead in the 21st century in the midst of a global pandemic. We don't know what the economics on the back end are going to look like. We don't know what the outbreak is going to look like. And so just lead with humility. Don't overcompensate. Don't get political, and just strip away those things and lead with humility. And finally, in the midst of that, I just think the people trust people that are real. And so it connects with that humility piece. But being honest about what you do and don't know, and communicating that in a ramped up level, even if it's not as buttoned up as you would normally have, I think is really healthy organizationally. We've tried to amp the amount of communication coming out of the church, even though we recognize, goodness, if we're communicating that much more, it's that much more possibility of making a mistake, of making a misstep, of saying something wrong. But people need to hear from that. And so if you're just maintaining your normal rhythms of communication, I would say, no, you need to multiply that by a factor of 2, 3, 4-fold to make sure that the people are walking alongside with you, because people are consuming information. And so if they're not hearing how you're processing that, 1 week is a lifetime right now for us. And so communicate.
John, how would you respond to somebody who just feels paralyzed because there is so much information and there is the uncertainty is off the charts right now? If you just feel, or that's in your job, groups or teams, even just your own family. But leader is a word we just use, influencer, or your influencer. If you just feel paralyzed right now, what do you do?
Yeah. Well, I think that this was the very first sermon I preached on that first Sunday when we kind of were transitioning and on the heels of when it hit the United States. Christ calls us to peace. And when we have anxiety in our heart, it reveals in us a self-dependence. And so that's okay. It's good to be honest about that. If you feel paralyzed, if you feel fearful, please, be honest with yourself. Don't lie to yourself about that. But recognize that, okay, whoa, hold on. In that moment, actually, that's a spiritual trigger in my life that I'm actually sinning right now. I'm outside of living in trust with Christ right now. And so to acknowledge that, to just say that out loud to Jesus, Jesus, I'm anxious right now. I am fearful right now, and I need your guidance. And then trust Christ with those steps. And I don't pretend to know what exactly the right thing to do is, but we need to act. And there's ways in which, if you're so out of step, there's a church in Florida right now where pastor was just arrested for continuing to hold services, and he's made a massive public deal about kind of standing up against the public authorities and that kind of thing. And there has to be a humility at some point where you look around and you say, goodness, I'm the only one on this island. I'm probably not the only faithful, Christ-loving pastor in America. And so let me listen to others around you. So I would really encourage you to, I've spent a lot of time on webinars in the last, on conference calls, on podcasts are coming out. And, I don't pretend that the information itself is going to cure it, but I'm trying to listen to other voices who are smarter than me and say, okay, how are they leading through this? How are they walking through this? And take my cues there. And that's not to shortchange the importance of prayer. It starts with prayer. It starts with dependence on Christ. But don't miss out on the wisdom around you of Christ followers.
I was asking that, John. I think I appreciate you when you answer that question initially, like God's called us to be at peace, and even just to even confess that to Him and acknowledge that and take that before Him and go, God, help me. I need you, which is a great prayer every day for us. But even just to take that into a friend and to say, whether to a friend or to a spouse, and just say, like, hey, I am feeling, anxious. I'm feeling anxiety. I'm uncertain what to do. And and there's power when you confess that to somebody else, and they could come alongside and pray for you. They don't need to fix it for you, but they just pray those things for you, and just allowing people in. That's what you said, that the humility piece for us, Sean. But yeah, the power of just allowing other people to walk that journey with you, or if that's for your own family, if that's for the life of our church, if that's for your own business. Like, just don't feel like you have to fix this alone, and you are the it's not self-dependence here. Let people in, let people help you take those next steps and help lead you and guide you. It's been fun to watch. We're all doing this. We're all on Zoom meetings. We're all on webinars. We're all listening and trying to compile as much information as we can to make that decision for our church. There's something powerful when you allow a friend or a spouse to come in and to speak that into you.
Yeah.
Any other final thoughts as we talk about how do you lead during uncertainty? That's helpful. It's been helpful for you, John.
No, I appreciate the conversation, Zach, and I would say even just pointing to just back what you said. Man, am I grateful to be leading in this crisis along with Greg, yourself, Kim, the elders as well. Those relationships, those people matter. That feedback is invaluable. And so to whoever the godliest, best minds are around you, not even just best minds, best hearts that are around you, lean in and listen. There have been plenty of times in the midst of this that I have, proverbial kind of pounded the table one way, and the group has said, I don't think so. And I've been so grateful that I was not making those decisions alone. We've not been perfect, but I tell you, we've done a lot better than if I would have been leading alone. So have the humility to have those relationships, starting with Christ, lean in there, and then lean into others.
Sorry, one more question I just thought of. So not every decision needs to happen fast. What's the value of making fast? Tell me, making fast decisions versus slow decisions, and just what are you learning about that in the midst of this crisis? When do we have to go fast? When do we have to go slow? And walking through both those together.
Yeah, goodness, that's a hard one. I'll just be real honest. I would say I am in general a slow decision maker, or maybe I'll put it this way: a slow implementer of decisions. In the sense that I feel like a long runway is helpful, and so there's real challenges in the midst of something like this where I feel like it cuts against the grain of kind of how I'm naturally built. I'd like to pull in people. I'd like to beta test things. I'd like to see how it works in small scale, and you just aren't able to do that in the midst of crisis. And so I would still say, be careful about being, that early adopter. If you're the very first one making a decision a certain way, I don't know, it might be right, but I don't think there's that much gain by being the very first one to do X, Y, or Z. On the other hand, be humble enough and listen to others enough to change your mind on those things. And so make sure that you're not at the end of that wave either, because you can just send messages that are problematic in that. So we found, for us, I would say that there's some kind of just general voices that we say, hey, we're listening to these voices even more than other voices. And so things, for instance, that the mayor and the governor have said have carried certain weight for us, that we've kind of said, hey, listen, we're going to track kind of the closing of the church along with how the governor is responding on the schooling. I've been grateful for that, because that kind of, it doesn't push the responsibility off of our shoulders. It's still our responsibility, but we're not just making this as an independent, just totally random decision. We're connecting ourselves with others who definitely have a lot of people in their ears. And so I think that there's a sense where if you can find that kind of thing, if you're a business and you have a chamber of commerce and you're going to have other voices there, listen to the smartest people in the room and kind of watch what they're doing, and don't be afraid to just follow the decisions that are being made for you.
I think for me, it's been interesting. I'm probably a fast decision maker and a fast implementer. Like, let's go. We made a decision. Let's go. But learning to process, okay, what needs to be fast and what needs to be slow, and just so if I can make the decision quickly, what do we have to do anything with it? And just even defining those questions in my head, going, okay, like we need to have a plan. Okay, doesn't mean just because we have a plan doesn't mean we got to start doing things with it. And so that's been really a process for me that's been really helpful. It's just been a good challenge for me is going, okay, like what part of these things do we need to go fast on? And what part of these things can we go slow on? And even just defining that, even at times I've written that out, like, okay, we need to go fast here. We got to go slow here. This could go, and being okay with that. And even maybe sharing that list with somebody else and going, am I missing something? Has been a helpful practice so I don't overreact, but also I'm not slow to react though either. So identifying those things for me has been a really helpful, not just, okay, I think we made a decision, now we got to go. Well, that's not always the case. Or sometimes it is. Sometimes we have to go faster. And so identifying those things and being okay with which ones I'm going fast and which ones I'm going slow with has been a good exercise for me as well.
It's really good. Yeah. I would say one way that we've leaned a little bit different than normal is I would say that our organizational DNA is to do a few things really well. But the reality is that knowing what those few things are has taken decades of institutional memory. And in a time like this, you have no idea what's going to work. And so we've been much more, hey, throw the spaghetti at the wall and let's see what sticks. And the reality is once we figure that out, then we'll spend more organizational energy on the best of those ideas. But we've been much more free. We've been saying a lot more yeses than we would normally say, with the recognition that if we put all of our eggs in one basket, we have no idea if that's the right basket or not. And so I think that's changed as well.
Yeah. So, well, thanks, Sean. I know you got things to do today as well, but thanks for having this conversation. It's one we're all facing right within our workplaces, and the groups of teams that we're a part of, even within our own family. Like, how do we lead in time of uncertainty? So appreciate your insight, appreciate the way you're leading us, and thank you. Thank you for listening to our Leading Well conversation. Again, our heart is to care for your soul, develop your skills, and cultivate groups and teams to do good work. However way we could best support you, please let us know. If you found value in this episode or any other episodes, we would appreciate it if you subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, and many other locations. More importantly, please share this podcast with anyone you think could benefit. I'm Zach and Bowden, and thanks for listening.